Welcome to our continuing adult education series centered around our reparations royalty program. It's great to see you all here this morning in the Miller Center. And welcome to those of you who are watching this on YouTube, Facebook, or any other way of watching it online. It's great to be with you in this new year and continuing our conversation around some absolutely fantastic, meaningful, moving, and hugely important music to the course of American musical history, and that is the American Negro spiritual. I am once again pleased to be joined by, those are all the words I was looking for. I'm once again pleased to be joined by the esteemed Dr. Craig Robertson, who will appear on screen right about, well, he's waiting for me to say more nice things about him.
Yes, I am.
Oh. Craig is the most, oh, there he is. Nice one.
We can go on. You can go on.
Oh, yeah. No, this would be great. You can be watching me. Yeah, Craig is, if you weren't here for our series in our session in October, Craig is we have a little bit of background coming through here. But yeah, Craig is the Director of Choral Studies at Mary Baldwin University in Virginia. And prior to his appointment there, he was here in Colorado as our children's music director while he was pursuing his doctoral degree at CU Boulder. It was a real coup for us to have Craig with us for the 3 years that he was our children's music director. And yeah, we're just thrilled to continue the relationship with Craig and to have him join us all the way from Virginia. So welcome, Craig.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Oh, good. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here again, those of you that are back, and welcome to those who are brand new to this session. And I really appreciate you. There you go. Hello, everybody. So thank you so much for being here. Well, back to Adam.
So we're going to do a quick summary of where we left off last time. So last time we spoke about the spirituals and essentially how they came to be. So we spoke of the spirituals during the time of slavery, and that's a very important distinction to always remember when thinking of the spirituals. And Craig is big on this too, that if it wasn't composed by an enslaved person, specifically an enslaved African here in the United States, then it does not count as a spiritual, right? So we have this very defining line that the spirituals are of what has been composed up until the point of emancipation, right? So that is a very distinguishing characteristic of the spirituals. Craig, why don't you give us a couple other distinguishing characteristics of the spirituals?
Yeah, so I think what's really important, I appreciate you bringing that point out, that we know that spirituals were composed by the enslaved and for the enslaved. So since no one is being enslaved in the physical sense, those songs are not being written anymore, they're being arranged. So a couple of things about the spiritual is knowing that they were written by the enslaved and for the enslaved. That's one distinction. Also that there are mostly have double meanings. We know about that they, the slaves meant one way, but the owners heard it in a different way. So that's another area of distinction. Thinking about musically that there's lots of syncopation, there's lots of now I lost my train of thought because I'll be 50 years old this year, so my brain is not quite. Lots of syncopation, rhythmically, they're really challenging, and that's a direct reflection of what happened with the music in Africa. There are lots of minor modes, flatted thirds, flatted sevenths, in there, and call and response was really big. That is definitely a reflection of the African diaspora as well. Like, you know, I would say something and you would kind of answer almost like the shave and the haircut, 2 bits kind of thing. You know, so that's really important. You can definitely tell that that is a spiritual based upon a couple of those things. The texts are also important. They're combined African rhythms and melodies combined with Christian hymnody. And hearing the stories being told by the preachers in the church about, you know, Daniel Lion's Den, Jonah and the whale, Moses and Pharaoh and the 3 Hebrew boys and that kind of stuff. So they would hear about these stories and then they would turn them and make themselves almost comparable to the children of Israel. So whatever happened with the children of Israel, how God delivered them from malevolent rulers, then they would say that we must be similar to those people, and the owner must be that malevolent ruler, and then Jesus is going to come and save us all from this eventually. And also thinking about the text, the context of the text are mostly heaven bound. I got my crown up into the kingdom, ain't it that good news? So they understood mostly that they were not going to be free on this earth. However, I'm going to be free in heaven, which is a total contrast with gospel music. And we're not talking about that, but I want to make that differentiation, that spiritual texts are mostly heaven bound. So when they sang about Beulah land, Canaan land, crossing over the Jordan, 1 or 2 things, they were talking about going to heaven or going to the north as far as Canada. And so when you're thinking about spirituals, think about the text. What are the words saying and what do they mean? And I think that would help us differentiate like gospel music and what we hear today than what was written back in those days. And also the tempo of spirituals are based upon the actual physical labor that the enslaved workers were doing at that time. So yeah, cool, right? I know, it's awesome.
Your brain's going pretty fast for somebody who's...
Pushing 50, is what you're saying? Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, gives me hope, man. I need to drink a little more coffee, though, to keep up with you. I love it. And we discussed a lot of that, obviously, at our last session. And that's a great, quick summary. As we are into the 19th century, and of course, we're seeing political movements happening to bring about the end of slavery and the Civil War and all that. But prior to that, there is already a dissemination, right, beginning of the spiritual in the fact that you've got white plantation owners or other white people that are in the surrounding, right, that are hearing this music being sung out in the work fields, and some white persons that have some musical knowledge are starting to write it down, right? Are starting to transcribe it, because that's another thing to remember, is this music was folk music in the purest terms of folk music, right? It's passed down through an oral tradition, right? It's not as though the enslaved person, after working all day, was like, wow, that was a great song, let's go home and write that out. You know, it was something that was just passed on, and that's why, too, that there's an inherent improvisatory aspect to the music, too, right? That it isn't just something that's on a page that then gets played back. But, so this is already starting to happen before the end of slavery, and a large reason why this is happening is because this music is so incredible. Like, if you even just take away the, if you just think of it from a purely musical standpoint, okay, if we strip it away from all of its kind of cultural and societal importance, right, and all the spiritual importance, then we just look at it from a music standpoint. Let's say we're just bringing it into a music theory class, right? It's hard for us to sit here in the year 2023 to understand how original and new and deeply moving this music was for people, right? It truly was unlike anything folks had heard before. And when you understand about how this music came to be, you start to realize, right, this melding of cultures, and an incredible the stress and the trauma and just the sadness of it all. But it's almost like it's almost like this incredible geologic press under which a diamond is formed, right? I mean, those are the conditions that formed the spiritual. And Craig's writing that down. I think he liked that line.
You're not supposed to see that. That was really well said. I love that. I'm going to write that down. Sorry.
Right. Score. So now slavery ends, and there's this, where does this music go? And what Craig's about to tell us about, as far as the HBCUs that were starting to be established at the end of slavery, we'll talk about Fisk University and the way that it was almost accidental, right? That they stumbled into, Go ahead, you take it for a while, Craig.
Absolutely. I love the story of Fisk University. So Fisk University, if you're not familiar, is an HBCU, historically black college university in Nashville, Tennessee. And it was founded shortly after slavery. A lot of religious organizations, Baptists, Methodists, began to start schools, and some public schools also, from the Moral Act of 18, I don't remember then, but it was some act where the government gave land to areas to establish colleges for formerly enslaved and the children of the formerly enslaved. So they became known as HBCUs, and Fisk University is one of those. And Fisk found there was some trouble that they were in financially, and George White was the treasurer and the choir director. So some formerly enslaved persons attending there and children of those enslaved, he put together a choral ensemble, and they began to sing these spirituals in the very raw form. However, he began to arrange them into 4-part harmony. And so normally they were just unison and maybe a couple of harmonic pieces to them, but he made them into like arrangements chorally. And these songs were arranged were songs that these formerly enslaved persons had perhaps sung on a plantation, or if they were children of the enslaved, they heard their parents or grandparents sing, because slavery wasn't too far removed from this particular time. So he began to travel around with this ensemble. I think it was 9 of them, and they were singing at different places. However, they were not quite welcomed in certain arenas. So the black folks didn't quite appreciate or understand this newfound version of these spirituals, and the white congregations, the white audiences didn't know them and didn't understand them as well. However, he continued on. So Fisk was in trouble financially. They traveled around the country, eventually went over to the United States. You all know this story because you took history in school. But and they sung for Queen Victoria, they sung for other monarchs in Europe, and they raised so much money that they saved the university. And there's a hall that is now named after them called the Jubilee Hall. And I don't know if you know this, but the Jubilee Singers were just in Boulder a year or 2 ago, and their director just recently passed last year. So they just won a Grammy Award. So it's very, very a unique institution. However, they are solely responsible for the globalization of the concertized spiritual, not the one that we hear from the plantation fields that we think about as being folk tunes, as just a melodic line, but those that are arranged for the concert stage, right? Which means that it loses its authenticity, because as Adam spoke earlier, that these songs were passed down through the oral tradition. And any indigenous music that we hear passed down through the oral tradition, when you begin to transcribe it, it loses its authenticity. He comes back to the screen and lets me know it's time to stop talking, right?
Well, I want to jump in here because I think this is an important aspect to realize as we ourselves think about a congregation singing the spiritual, to realize that the minute the spiritual left the work field, the plantation, it became distilled, right? It is no longer in its purely authentic form. And Craig did a great job mentioning this. It's not just white folks who were having a problem with figuring out how to perform a spiritual and continue to have a problem. It was also the black community. And there is well-documented research of letters going back and forth between various high-profile black musicians at the turn of the century, or just prior to the turn of the century, having serious debate about how the spirituals should be concertized. You know, that some thought that they were being too prettied up, right? Too prettied up. Some felt as though that too harmonic, the introduction of a 4-part harmony. Does everyone have a general sense of what that means? You know, if we were to see the spiritual in our hymnal in its purely authentic form, we wouldn't see it, right? Okay, just by nature of the fact you're writing it down dilutes the authenticity. If the closest we could probably get to writing it down would be a single line, right? A single note line. Of course, when we think about our hymnal, you open it up, well, there's more than just one note on most of the hymns, right? There's the top note, the note below it, which is the alto, and then down in the bass clef, you've got the tenor, which is the top note, and the bass, which is the bottom note, and that is what we refer to as the 4-part harmony. So it's important. I find that to be a really important distinction because I think sometimes certain of us maybe, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but maybe some of us of a certain political leaning get a little hard on ourselves and don't think, we get so focused on the, we are not this, so we can't possibly do it, right? And that kind of misses the point because the point is none of us in this country was an enslaved person in the 17th and 18th century. What's important is to try to find the most deeply authentic and understanding that there's always going to be something to learn, right? That you're never going to achieve the ultimate authenticity behind this.
I would say when Dr. Andre Thomas, formerly at Florida State, he mentions that we cannot sing or perform spirituals authentically, but we can bring integrity to them. So I take out the word authenticity and put in integrity, which means that I do the study. I not only learn the notes and rhythms, of course, but I also learn about what we're talking about now. Where did they come from? Who were these people that originally composed them? What were they doing? How did they get here? How politically, socially, economically, what was happening in their lives to get them to the point where they wrote these particular pieces? And we bring honor to those people who were brought here against their will, right? So we talk about enslaved, or we should say kidnapped, okay? And so, and they wrote these pieces of these songs, these ditties, these folk tunes rather, out of duress. And so we acknowledge that by bringing integrity, but singing them with integrity, not trying to sound black, I'm not trying to sound like a slave, I'm not trying to think about this being minstrelsy, because I know there's some, I've seen white teachers talk about, well, my students think it's minstrelsy to sing spirituals because of the dialect and they don't want to be offensive. Well, to change the dialect to standard English is appropriation, because that is not what those people wrote. And we ought to bring integrity to that. You would not change a Hispanic song. None of us are going around telling Bach, I'm going to change that because that wasn't right. We're not going to do that. We're going to just do it to the best of our ability and bringing honor to those people. So we scratched the term authenticity because none of it is authentic, as Adam pointed out. Once it was written down, authenticity went out the window. You cannot notate nuance and feeling. And so the improvisatory nature of those spirituals had a lot of those things to it. Like, you can't sing Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. You would sing it differently if you were snatched from your mother's bosom on an auction block versus, your mama living down the street and she mistreating you. It's a totally different feel. So I think once we understand the plight of the enslaved people, then we can sing these with more integrity. That makes sense. Hope I've made sense what I said.
Yes, and Craig, that's a line I've taken from you because I forgot that this morning, but I love that you
Did you write it down?
Yeah, I could write it down. Yeah.
And when you quote me, say Craig the Great.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Sorry.
No. Do you know Melanie Demore? Do you know of Melanie Demore?
I do not.
So she's Oakland based, and she came out and worked with the Colorado American Choral Directors Association summer gathering, and so she presented.
Hold on. You went to an ACDA conference?
I did.
Okay. You're welcome, people. I encourage them to do that. You're welcome. All right, go on.
Craig, we got to take this on the road, man. At any rate, Melanie has had a fascinating career in that she's worked with choirs and audiences of all generations, and she specializes in spirituals, and she contextualized. I think she did a beautiful job contextualizing, finding this integrity in the fact that, she actually started with the fact that, well, we've all have been through moments in our lives that we have felt that loss of control. We have felt something taken away from us. And she really encouraged us to get into that spot, right, to think back onto that moment. And then, she led us right into singing a spiritual from our own kind of personal experience. And then she said, okay, take that, and now take that feeling that you have of that memory when something was taken from you, and now put yourself in this position, and relayed a story of an enslaved person. And it's like, okay, that's the power of the music. I can connect personally on one level, but then I can also recognize this whole other level, right, to it. She made us take all a pledge, and I mentioned this at the first session, is that we are never going to say, let's sit around and have our kumbaya moment. She's like, we're not going to make a joke about that song anymore, because really this is what that song means when you think about the Gullah people singing that, come by here, and what that really meant to that community. So let's stop, doing it as a little aside joke,
Good.
Yeah. So, let's listen. Craig was like, I think you played this last time. I can't remember, and if I can't remember, then certainly there's a lot of other people here who can't remember. Let's listen to a bit of the Fisk Jubilee Singers singing Sweet Low, Sweet Chariot. This was recorded in, it's got to be 1910, 1950, 1909, excuse me, 1909. So here we are. Some beautiful singing on there, right? And if it sounds that good on a 1909 recording, imagine what it must have sounded like in person to actually hear that. That's kind of reminding me a bit of Roger Holland, who's the director of the Spirituals Project. Speaking of not doing a piece with integrity, this might help us transition into how we talk about how spirituals are used in worship, but let's talk about how spirituals are used in concerts first. Roger's had to sit through lots of concerts where, a choir, usually predominantly white, sings a bunch of pieces, and they're like, and now for our closing number, a spiritual, swing low, sweet chariot, come forth and demo. And he's just out there going, oh no. That's not what this is about, that's not what's going on. This is all kind of supposition on my part, but I wonder, Craig, and I'm just going to throw this out there, if because the spirituals were so heavily influential on the course of 20th century popular American music. We can draw a straight line from spirituals into blues, into jazz, and then of course from there it goes into rock and roll and stuff. Has that then now affected, especially those who don't know much better, our ears and how we approach spirituals? Is that why somebody's like, well, let me do it an up-tempo thing because that's kind of what sounds natural for that harmonic language, totally ignoring, of course, the context of the piece and the text behind the piece? Or is it, I just wonder how we got to that place that, somebody thinks that that's a good idea.
I can't tell you when that happened,
Yeah.
but I would tell you that I know spirituals arrangements we can see how they have transitioned from simple swing low we just heard, the simple 4-part harmony progression, to the Moses Hogan style, where they're a little more, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but a little more energetic and more rhythmically challenging, to where we have now, to where it's 8-part, everything is all over the place. It's almost fugal and contrapuntal and just all over, and I think that the text and the meaning can be lost because we're so concerned about making the song sound contemporary, if that makes sense. So, and I think too that we know this historically speaking, that when the enslaved received their emancipation, that a lot of them decided to move to the north, right? The Great Migration happened. And they wanted to get away from the idea, the plantation life, the southern life, the enslaved life. So those that moved to the north, that's where we get gospel music from and jazz music from, right? But in the South, you still heard a lot of spirituals and blues and some soul music. So I think we see that people are trying to get away from the notion of the rest of the plight of the slaves. We don't really want to focus on the idea of being enslaved. So the farther we remove ourselves from the plight of the enslaved, the more the music begins to change. We see that in a lot of different styles of music, right? So I think that I don't want to be offensive with different ranges of our gospel, but some of it is really not good because it's just so far away from the original intention of it. So now I don't even know what the song is about. And for case in point, sooner we'll be done with the troubles of the world. Like, there's still a debate on how to sing that particular spiritual. Should it be, sooner we'll be done with the troubles, or slow, or soon we'll be done with the troubles of the world, troubles of the world. So which one is authentic or more authentic than the other? And so there's still debates about that. But I tell you that we do not sing a lot of the earlier 20th century arrangements of spirituals. We've tried to move more towards the contemporized versions, where they're really hard to sing, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. This year I'm doing a Jester Harrison piece, which is very simple, but the meaning is there,
Right.
right?
Right.
I don't know if that answers the question or not,
Yeah,
but that's
no,
all
no.
right.
Well, and I just kind of threw that was definitely not on our outline.
Yeah, because I have notes on the outline. You can
Yeah.
do it.
But, something you said there about formerly enslaved folks moving north, and I don't know if I don't know this. I'm just kind of, we're having a little bit more of a conversation here, folks, than a pre-thought out thing at this point. But I wonder, what do you think a black church in Chicago, let's say, at the turn of the century, as far as this kind of moving away from spirituals and starting to establish the gospel sound?
Yeah, there's a whole nother lecture by itself. There are two different thoughts about the black church. So there are those that continued with the idea of high church, right? So they were probably attending as enslaved persons worship services where they were performing, singing lots of hymns, and they experienced that kind of stuff. So they modeled their post-slavery services after that type of style. And then you have other churches that wanted to get back to the high energy of the Bush Harbor worship experiences, or even the way that the Africans worshiped, with the dancing and the clapping and the moving around, a whole lot more liberated style of worship. So those two things were definitely in contrast. You saw a lot more of the praise house gospel things happening in the cities, more so than you did in, well, not necessarily, that's not true, let me take it back. You saw them kind of moving together, but they were in contrast to one towards another. So then you had the Pentecostal movement, and then you had the high church movement. And those that were of the high church movement felt that those were the more upward mobile blacks, I would say. They had the more education, they were more, they had the better jobs, and they looked at the Pentecostal worship experience as being primitive and barbaric and lacked understanding. And you even had some of I don't remember who the person was, but it was a minister in the 19th century that actually, when he heard some of the spirituals being sung, and then eventually moved into the Praise House Bush Harbor songs, that he banned them from singing and said, this is not God's music, and we should not sing that kind of stuff. Right. So there's actual book that admonishes them to not, I think we talked about this before.
No, this is new.
Not sing this type of music in this church because it is not Christian music.
That's fascinating.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And now you can't go to anybody's church and they not sing a black song.
Well,
yeah.
So that's a great pivot point. So there's a bit of how the spirituals and like you said, it's a whole other class. And by the way, Craig is teaching a class on black sacred music that he started at Mary Baldwin University. This is his first semester teaching it and he got a full enrollment. I have a feeling if you were ever to offer that online, you'd get a lot of enrollees right here.
Okay.
Maybe next semester, Craig.
Let me get through this one first.
Yes. Let's think about a predominantly white church, right? At a certain point, the spirituals started to come into predominantly white worshiping communities. And I don't know enough yet to know exactly how that happened. I would love to talk to Brian Henn, who is the executive director of the Center for Congregational Song. I have a feeling that he would have some thoughts about that. But one thing I know for certain is when they did start to come into the spirituals, into a predominantly white congregation, it was printed on a page in a hymnal, and it was initially performed by a white person. Those two things I can be wholly confident under. So Craig, I'm not going to put you on the spot here too much, because I have some thoughts too. But, you know, obviously and we know that we're very well intentioned here at Montview, right? That folks bring their best hearts to this. And, but at the same time, you know, we're all kind of born into what we're born into. And, I mean, you've lived in both worlds. You've lived, obviously, for many years in the predominantly black church world, and then you came here to Colorado and was like, let me find a bunch of Presbyterians to go work for.
See how that happened, but sure.
And so, and you can, you know, we know you're very kind-hearted, and we're not going to take offense to anything you say, but I wonder, like, at Montview, you know, seeing a predominantly white congregation approach as spiritual, was there anything that struck you about that compared to the churches you grew up in?
Well, I would tell you that, and you know, I pride myself in being very honest, but I don't think that there was anything that, you know, made me think about red flags at Montview when it came down to the spiritual. I think that I agree with you that Montview was very well intentioned, and I believe that there was only one thing, if I can just one little thing that I remember once we were singing something, and I can't remember which song it was, a spiritual, I think it was a spiritual, and one person mentioned that, oh, that was so much fun. And immediately the hairs on my arm was like, you know, however, I knew that they didn't mean it in a negative connotation. It was just a misunderstanding of, I think after that, I made a conscious decision, conscious choice and effort to discourage people from saying that spirituals were fun. Because these persons that compose these spirituals, although they may have been singing, I got a crown and that kingdom ain't that good news, and it's energetic. So exchange the word fun for energetic, fast-paced, up-tempo. We can even say enjoyable or moving. But fun, I don't think that I walked away thinking there's nothing fun about a person being owned by another person. There's nothing fun about a person being murdered, their family members being murdered, their husband being raped in front of them by the slave owner, their children being taken from them, you know, their wives being raped in front of them in their home, and there's nothing they could do about it, but yet they're saying, I got a crown in that kingdom, ain't that good news? That doesn't necessitate the word fun. So I think that we can exchange that for energetic and not fun. I think the language of that person had, you know, was a little concerning to me, but I know that they didn't mean that in a bad way. But it made me, after that, start being very intentional when I'm teaching about spirituals to tell people to never say that it's fun. I don't know, maybe you have been in a situation maybe where you felt oppressed, and now you can understand that that wasn't a fun time for you, you know? So I think that that was the only thing that kind of rubbed me a little bit in that moment. But I think, honestly, that since I've been at Montview, that Adam has always been, or had, because it's past tense for me, always been intentional about teaching and bringing integrity to those songs and asking me about it, asking other folks about it. So I don't think that there was anything that I saw other than that one little instance. That was like one of the first times that I was there.
I think, Craig, you bring up a really great point, and I suspect that Montview is not alone in, or that person who shared that with you, that is not a unique sentiment among predominantly white congregations. And I think what's lacked for many years, and this is the work that's ahead of us, and this is a big reason why we're doing what we're doing with the Reparations Royalty Project, is that we have long neglected and ignored the context under which this music was written. We have, especially if you go off and study music at university, right? And it's starting to change a bit. And thanks to people like Dr. Robertson here, it's changing even more. But the music conservatory education in this country is still, and certainly was 20 years ago when I was in school, predominantly Western European focused. And we are taught to elevate Bach and Beethoven and Brahms and Mozart above all else. At Carnegie Mellon, when I was a first-year undergraduate student, I have a lot of very fond memories, and I loved going to that school. But one thing I did not appreciate was the fact that as a music composition major, we had to enroll in a major ensemble. Okay, so that means that they wanted to make sure that you knew the performance aspects of making music, that you weren't just going to be some kind of composer holed up in their studio writing mathematical equations, creating music that no one could ever perform, right? You had to have some kind of tangible thing. So I thought, well, that's great. I play jazz piano. Like, I can be in the jazz ensemble. That will count as my major ensemble. Because Carnegie Mellon had a great jazz ensemble that played many, many concerts throughout the course of the year. Rehearsed twice a week for 2 hours each rehearsal, and did probably, like I said, 4 or 5 concerts a semester. Guess what? Jazz ensemble doesn't count as a major ensemble. Your major ensembles are either orchestra, wind ensemble, or choir. Well, I didn't play an orchestral instrument well enough to be able to compete with the kids that were there as music performance majors, so that meant off to choir I went, okay? And that they, and you know, at the time I didn't, you know, you don't really realize what's going on, right? But now, over the course of years, you realize, wait, this was like essentially a white superiority thing going on here, that they elevated the Western music or Western European music tradition over the American musical tradition. And a big, big, big part of the American musical tradition is what the black community has given this country. So I'm kind of going off here a bit.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
At my school, we are doing a decolonization of our curriculum, where I understand that in conservatory or academia, you cannot rid yourself of Western European music, right? However, you can add diverse voices to it. So if you think about, and I'm pretty sure this was the same with you, all of music theory, there are rarely ever any person of color, and probably not many women, whose examples will appear inside of a music theory textbook. And Undine Smith Moore, who you also know is another research area of mine, wrote a theory book using black composers' music as examples. She took that book to New York to get published, and they all denied her. Every single one of them. However, she still taught her students, from Billy Taylor, her students, Camilla Williams and Lynn Thompson, these other musical greats, from that book. They remember her with pages out of that book, although that book does not exist anymore. So there were people trying to decolonize mid 20th century. However, there were those of the white supremacy idea that white is right, especially European music is right, and there should not be anything else. It's good music, right? Even some of the turn of the century, early 20th century music educators believed that we should only study music of high quality. And then they began to list Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms. So, no, maybe Aaron Copland, but no person of color, limited women, no indigenous music, so whatever. And the majority of our students will never be exposed to that. So then it stops, it prohibits that continuation of learning this music. So we're in our university now starting to decolonize and decanonize our music repertory so that we can bring in different voices also that represents our student body.
And I want to make an important distinction here that it's not about bringing Bach down, right? We have this tendency to feel like, oh, and this is just, I think, an American culture problem altogether, or maybe it's just, that for some reason we get into this mindset that there isn't enough, right? We hear Walter Brueggemann talk about this when he comes, that we get caught in this idea that there isn't enough. And so it's fight against that urge when we talk about this decolonization or this movement away from a Western European centralized course of study, that we're not talking about lessening Bach. I mean, Bach's music is incredible, right? Craig just did Vivaldi's Gloria with his choir this past November. It's about elevating, right, the music that we've been pushing down, a lot of times unintentionally, you know, but now that our eyes are being opened, it's like, okay, we've got to bring this music up. And so when we talk about integrity, right, when we talk about doing music with integrity, well, certainly we're always doing that with Bach, or trying to, right? It's important that we now take the spirituals and raise it up to that same level that we've held Bach and Beethoven and all the other Western European masters for so long. Craig, we ran out of time again. It happened again.
Well, I mean, I have many more notes. We always, because we have such a great time and it's such an important topic, and I just appreciate, Mark, you doing the work that, and hoping that what you're doing will be modeled by other congregations across this country, because I think it's important work. And then once, you know, you think about the spirituals, but also we've done so much with elevating women's voices, but there are also other voices, not just spirituals, but native voices, other indigenous musics that are just fabulous pieces, bodies of work that we've otherized their culture, so we've otherized their music. And that's what we've done with the spiritual. Bach is up here. We're not really going to study the spiritual too much, but we're going to just have fun with it, put it at the end of the program, and that's it. Well, you've otherized a whole culture of people because our experience matters as well. So I appreciate you doing the work, and we'll be doing the work together because I'm learning. I just learned something from you today. So anyway, yeah, thank you. That's all.
Well, thank you, Craig. And I think maybe we'll even try to get you back for a third session, just for like a little Q&A. We keep running out of time for questions. I just keep loving talking to you, but I think I have a feeling that...
Go to the worship service. Just stay here. You need to go to the worship service.
I love it.
Don't think what happened when I said that.
Thank you so much, Craig. It was wonderful to see you. Have a round of applause for Craig. We'll talk soon, buddy.
All right, take care. You all have a great day.
Thank you all very much. I think we will try to get Craig back for part 3 because